Okay, so then we can just post the recording for anybody that couldn't make it on in time. If there's any questions that anyone has about hair cutting or like the details that go into hair cutting, you can post them in the chat now so that we make sure that we cover them during this time. Okay, well, I guess we can just get started then. I think all of the small details that go into a haircut are really what makes a great haircut stand out from like a basic or mediocre haircut. Some of the things that go into the details are knowing which questions to ask, giving a really good consultation, knowing your tools and how to use them, and then kind of having little ways to troubleshoot in case they come in with a haircut that maybe already has some problems, or maybe they have a lot of damage and they're trying to keep the length. So knowing things like that is really going to help set you up to give the best haircut. So I think a thorough consultation is always one of the most important parts. So knowing what questions to ask, you want to first go over if they're trying to do like a transformational haircut where they're going to do something drastic and very different from what they have now, or if they are kind of just trying to clean up what they have. I like to always ask a lot of open-ended questions during consultations. I don't like just I try to stay away from questions that are going to give me just like yes and no answers, because I feel like you get more information obviously out of the client when you're asking an open-ended question. So I always ask first, like, what do they love about their hair? Like, tell me one thing you love. And it doesn't have to be about their current haircut, just like one thing in general that they really like about their hair. Sometimes their answer is just they like the color, but that's where you'll kind of get to know if like someone has thicker hair and they say, I love how full my hair is, you're going to know you want to like keep that. Or if they say the opposite, like, because that's my next question I always ask is, what's something you don't like about your hair? Which that question is always like easier for people to answer, which is kind of sad, but it is. I feel like that's why they're here in the first place, is because there's clearly something that they don't like about what's going on. And getting them to answer those questions will help you get a better idea of where you need to start. Do you have any questions?
I want to jump on that too. So I feel like I like asking like what they like and what they don't like about their haircut too. I feel like even with haircutting, that's even more important, because say if like they really like that everything's like more like one length rather than like having short pieces like in front, and then like you just go in and like kind of like take that away from them. I feel like that's really important, because if you take away like something that they really like about their hair, then like that doesn't go with a good experience. So I love what Amanda said, asking what they like and what they don't like, because then you can fix what they don't like potentially and then keep what they do. So I think that's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. It just helps keep everyone on the same page and make sure that the service is staying like consistent and that you both have the same ideas, because clients don't know the terms that we know. So they're never going to come in and say, I want like concave layers or something. Like, they won't say things like that. So getting them to explain the things they like or don't like really just like helps us know what it helps us create a plan and know what we're going to do. I always think that reference photos in a haircut are so important too. Just because they might be something that they think is short might not be very short to us. So reference photos, pointing out things in the reference photos that they maybe wouldn't have paid attention to, like pointing out like the shortest piece of a layer, pointing out exactly where it falls on the person and showing them where it's going to fall on them. So I always, say if they show me a picture of some sort of a bob, I say, okay, on her, it looks like it's falling about here. Does that seem good for you? I use a lot of reference points throughout haircutting, and especially in my consultation, reference points like the collarbone, the jaw, the ear, their nose, because it's easier for them to understand that too, instead of saying like around shoulder length. You want to keep it more like specific to one area so that they can really imagine it more on themselves.
Yeah, I feel like that's good too, because I feel like an inch to us is different to a client. So I think that's really important too, like what you said, like actually understanding like exactly where the hair is going to fall. I think that's a good point too.
Yeah. Another important question to ask during the consultation is, how do they normally style their hair, and like what is their lifestyle like? Do they work out a lot? Do they wear their hair up a lot? Do they prefer to wear it down? Do they curl it? Do they leave it straight? Do they naturally air dry it? All of those are important too, because it'll help go along with their reference photo. I can't tell you how many times I have a client that's like super low maintenance and super laid back, and they never blow dry their hair. Maybe once in a blue moon they'll curl it, but then they show me a picture that is a ton of styling. So I'm always very upfront right in the beginning, like, this is beautiful and I think it's going to look great on you, but it is a lot of styling. So like letting them know that ahead of time, because it might not be something they want to commit to, and they might not realize that it's all of that styling. And some people think that their hair might just naturally form some sort of like a curl pattern or something if it's shorter. So yeah, making sure that you like identify what is styling in the picture and like what they would need to do to achieve it before you start cutting, because some people will realize like that is too much of a commitment for me, and like I can't promise I'm going to do that every day to make my hair look like that. And letting them know maybe what it would look like if it wasn't styled, because they might still like the cut, but you don't want them to have the expectation of the picture when it's not going to look like that if they don't do it at home.
And I feel like a lot of like really detailed haircuts too, like they don't look like the picture. They're not styled. So or anything, like I like what Amanda said, like I make sure that I tell them, be like, it's not going to look like the picture if you're not committed to styling it. So I think touching base on that in the consultation is really important.
Definitely. And then lastly, one of the things that's so important is identifying your client's natural texture, their density, their wave pattern, before starting the haircut. In your professional opinion, is this haircut going to look good with their natural texture, or do they have way too much hair for that specific haircut? I have a client who has a ton of hair, like the thickest hair, and she always like kind of flirts with the idea of wearing it in like one of those really cute, like longer pixies. But I constantly tell her how much maintenance that's going to be, because her hair is so thick. It's going to be like a ton of like thinning out and whatever. And not even that, shorter haircuts, as we all know, need to come in more often to keep them at that length, but to keep it as not as thick as her natural hair is would be like a huge thing. So in your professional opinion, like, is the haircut do you think it's gonna look good on their face shape? A client will appreciate you being honest and telling them that something isn't going to work versus just doing it and then it doesn't look like the picture. It doesn't do any of those things and then they hate it. If I'm going to tell a client no on something, or if I'm going to give my opinion that I don't think it's going to look the best on them or whatever, I always come up with something similar that I think would look good on them. You don't ever want to just be like, no, like that's not really going to work, because then they're kind of like, okay. And then they're more prone to just being like, well, let's just trim it today and like we could think about it. And then they're not leaving happy because they came in wanting something different. And we, told them that we didn't think it was going to look good and then didn't have a follow-up. So I always try to come up with something similar that I think is going to look good, and explain to them the differences between what they originally asked for and like what I think is going to look better and why. And usually that's how I get a long time guest, because now they can trust me. I told them that I didn't think something was going to look good, but I gave them the option of something that I think would look great on them. Do you want to touch on that, Mel?
Yeah, I think a lot of my clients too, because like I have done that in the past, like I've come up with like something that would make me work better. I feel like every time they come in after, they even say like, I like this, but like obviously like whatever you think is best with like my hair. I feel like when you come up with like that solution for like your client, then they're more like prone to like kind of like let you do whatever you want, or kind of like use like your best judgment rather than like them kind of like picking out like what they want. So I think that's really important to have like that already planned before like you go into the haircut.
Yeah, absolutely. And like again, we are the professionals, like we know what's going to work and what's not. And then, you know, they appreciate that about us. That's the reason they're coming to us, because they need help with their hair. Another thing too is if there is a haircut that, you know, you don't think would be best on them because maybe of their hair texture or whatever, and they're like adamant about doing it, it's knowing the ways to make that haircut work. So if you're not super confident in doing it, that's when I would maybe suggest that the client go see somebody else that maybe specializes in like that length or texture or density or whatever the case may be. Because again, like we don't want to like botch anyone's haircut, just trying to like people please.
Yeah, I think it's great knowing that like it's a good thing sometimes to like share clients or give a client away. Like I love that like Amanda works next to me and we work the same hours, and I feel like she's really good at like the things that I'm like not really good at. So I feel like whenever like that happens, like it's a good easy solution. So I feel like having like maybe like that person like in the salon that like kind of like specializes in like the opposite things as you is like almost like a good thing too. I feel like
Yeah.
we're really big at that at our salon.
Yeah, definitely. And like talk to your coworkers and see what do they love doing? Like what are they passionate about? What, you know, what do they think their really strong suit is? Sometimes it's easy to like get wrapped up in conversations like in the back room that don't really have to do with work. And it is a nice escape to not have to like talk about work all the time. So sometimes I think things like that can get lost between coworkers. So knowing what everyone's strong suit is, I think is super important for like what Melanie said. Like you're not going to want to do every single thing that comes to you, and you would rather be able to point the client in the direction of somebody you can and keep them in your salon versus saying you don't really know, or you know, sending them away where they might go somewhere else, or attempting to do it and it doesn't turn out great, so then they still go somewhere else. So then on the opposite end of all of that, a lot of the times too, we'll get a client that comes in and says, you know, I love exactly what I had last time. So whether you cut it or and you don't remember, because it could have been a long time. Some people go a very long time in between haircuts, or if they, you know, are coming from a different stylist, say their stylist moved or whatever, and they really loved what they had about their haircut last time, knowing how to read the haircut from last time. So one important thing with that is always asking how long ago was your last haircut? Because we know that your hair grows on average like a half an inch a month. So if they say, you know, it's been 2 months, you know, they're going to probably, if they wanted it like last time, then they probably grew like an inch of hair. So you'll probably take an inch off. Another thing is pulling the hair out at all different angles of the head and seeing how it lines up with your fingers will show you how the haircut was like layered or what degree it was held out at the last time it was cut. Does that make sense to everyone? Do you want to touch on that at all, Mel?
Yeah, like what can you like elaborate like a little bit? Like
Yeah, so like if they were like, I don't really know, I just really loved everything I did last time, and I got my hair cut 2 months ago, and like this is just kind of a grown out shape of it. So first I always look at the length and I say, okay, so probably like an inch off. Like, does this look about right? Does this feel good? They say yes or no. Sometimes maybe they want to go a little bit shorter, whatever. And then I always look at the face framing and I say, okay, so I see you have like a little bit of face framing. Like, is that intentional? A lot of times people are breakage and like they're trying to grow it out.
A lot of the times.
Yeah. So like, is that an intentional face frame? Do you love it? Do you not like it? Is it too long? Is it too heavy? Asking questions like that, because then I can start to form a plan of how much I'm going to cut off, what tools I'm going to use when it comes to like refining my haircuts if they do think it's too heavy. And then as far as like the layering goes, they're like, I don't know, I really love the layers. I always start by pulling the hair out like straight to see, you know, where it falls, or I'll pull it like up at this angle, or I'll pull it up high, and wherever the ends line up with my fingers is how I know where the previous person or maybe myself had cut it last time. Like that is the angle they were holding the hair when they cut it last. It's kind of hard clearly to show on Zoom. But play around with a friend's hair or a mannequin's hair, or even one of your clients where you know what you did, and practice pulling it out at different points from the head, and it'll show you exactly how the hair was cut last time. The only time that's not going to work is when it is a completely straight, no layer, one length blunt haircut, because clearly if you pull it up, it's never going to make a point because it was all cut at one straight line. And then, yeah, the same, you know, with the face frame, that's, I think, one of the most important, where they're going to tell you, because sometimes our face frame doesn't grow as fast as the rest of our hair because we pay more attention to it. We curl it more, we're touching it more. It's affected by our face products. So it doesn't always like grow at the same rate. So after all of this is kind of when I start to make a plan in my head for like what I'm going to do and what tools I'm going to use. I don't use the same exact tools for every haircut. I switch up between using texturizing shears or using a razor. Most of my haircuts are done clearly with just shears, but I do a ton of refining work my haircuts, which is what I think is a very small detail that some people might skip because it does take extra time, but I think it helps a haircut stand out between a basic haircut. I always feel like personally a wet haircut is never a very accurate haircut. So if someone's getting a haircut and they're like, well, you know, I really like to leave wet, I always am like, can we just dry it this one time? Like I need to make sure things are laying right and, you know, that everything's straight. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes, because they don't want to leave with a not good looking haircut either. So I always do just the very basic shape of the haircut wet. So if their hair's fine, I usually don't even layer it when it's wet. I feel like it helps me from creating holes in the hair. I can just see more when it's dry. I can feel where more of the weight is when it's dry. So when I am doing a wet haircut, I'm taking off the length. And if they don't have any layers, or we're going to do a ton of layering, I will put in like the very basic shape of the layering while it's wet. The same thing with if they're doing face framing or like a new bang and they didn't have it before, I will put in the very basic when it's wet. Again, using reference points, especially when it comes to the bangs. When someone is wearing like a fringe or a bang, you don't want to take it too short. And to keep in mind, again, like their hairline, do they have colics? Is this going to work with their lifestyle? Are they somebody that has to wear their hair back for work? So you want to make sure you're keeping it long so they can tuck it behind the ear or pull it into a ponytail. And then using the reference points, like, is the bridge of your nose like a good starting spot for a longer curtain bang? Or do you like your face frame to start around the jaw? I always say things like that. And again, putting it in a little bit longer than we had agreed on when it's wet, because it is going to shrink up and, you know, bounce up a little bit higher when it's dry. Do you want to touch on wet haircuts, Mel?
Yeah, I kind of do the same. I always just give myself like a basic shape. And then when everything's dry, I go in and do all the detailing, because I feel like, again, like you need to see how their hair lays when it's actually done, because that's how it's going to be. It's going to be dry. It's not going to be wet. So I think that's really important. And with the face framing, I kind of do what Amanda said. Like I kind of like let them like pick like where they want it. So I think using like verbiage, like not using the inches and doing more of like where you want it is important, because again, I'm not going to be like, you just want an inch off and then I go and cut it and then that's actually not where they wanted it. So I think that's really important too for like detailing hair cutting around the face.
Yeah. Okay, so then we'll go into refining the haircut. So when you're gonna finish, when you go to start drying it, I always blow out the haircut smooth, unless they have curly hair, and they always wear it curly. They never wear it straight. They only wear it curly. That's the only time I will check a haircut like curly. So then in that case, like I'll diffuse it, or I'll put in some curly products and maybe pop them under the dryer for a few minutes, just so that it kind of dries like in a more natural state. And then I cut it the way it's like, I'll go in and refine the way it lays. Other than that though, I always blow the hair out smooth. I feel like there I can see if my lines are straight. I can see if there's a spot that was missed. Sometimes, you know, there's like a few hairs that just didn't get cut the same. So I always blow the hair out smooth, and then I go in and I check the base of the haircut first to make sure everything is the same length, everything, there's no like straggly hairs left behind. I check with the client, how is this length feeling so far? And that's when a lot of the times they'll be like, you know, I wish it was a little shorter. Perfect. Now we can go in and do that. Or, and you know, you can ask that too while it's still wet. And sometimes they'll be like, I don't know, but remind them it is going to bounce up a little. So when it's dry, when it's first dry and you check that base, I always ask, you know, how's the length feeling? Whatever. With coming, I do a lot of like very like thick haired people. One trick I learned during a cutting class that I want to share because it was life changing for me is when you're checking the base of your haircut and their hair is so thick, if you take your shears and you just like cut straight into it, like really like deep point cuts throughout the bottom, like the perimeter of the haircut, it will help it lay more flat and more straight, which was huge for me because it doesn't bulk up anywhere. Women, especially for some reason, have like the thickest points of their hair is usually right behind the ear. So that those back corners can always look a little bit bulked out. So doing like long, deep point cuts through those areas will help kind of give it enough room to like spread out a little, making it lay nicer, and helping it appear to be more of a straighter line. Oh, go ahead, Mel.
No, I was just gonna say I like that. I want to watch you do it one time.
Oh yeah, I do it all. I do it pretty much almost on everybody, unless their hair is like super, super fine.
Yeah.
But I do it all the time because I feel like it just helps the haircut lay so much nicer. So then from there, I look at how the haircut is already laying just from my basic wet haircut. Does it look like there's some sort of a weight line from maybe the basic layering I put in? Maybe. I feel like that's a big problem a lot of people have, and then they don't know exactly how to refine it. When I am refining my haircuts, I am always only point cutting. The only time I'm not is like when I'm getting that baseline completely straight. And then from there, when I go in and I do the point cuts around the perimeter, everything after that is usually point cutting. So all of my layers from there on out are like choppy point cuts. It just helps everything lay nicer. It helps blend out lines. It helps remove weight. It's, to me, it is like the only way to dry cut.
Yeah, I feel like too, it's like no one really even like wants really chunky layers anyway, like anymore. Like that's like not in. So I feel like doing like that refining is like super important when the hair is dry.
Yeah, it just like helps keep everything blended. You don't want people to be able to count their layers, so that's a nice way to, you know, make sure they can do that. So if the client has very thick hair, you need to know where and how to take the weight out. So you have like an option, an array of tools you can use between like slide cutting with your shears, using texturizing shears, using a razor. The thing with that is you want to make sure you're picking the appropriate tool based off of their hair and what you know that tool is going to do. So if somebody has a naturally like wavy or curly texture, I try to stay away from the razor on dry cutting because it makes it look like a very frizzy end. Sometimes the only time I'll even use a razor if they don't have like pin straight hair is like just maybe a little bit around the face frame. And then knowing when enough is enough. I can't tell you how many times I've had thicker haired clients like tell me that their hair was completely ruined by a stylist that was kind of just scissor happy with the texturizing shears. Like there is a point where too much is too much. So knowing like when to stop. A lot of the times I do a little bit, and I think I almost never use just one tool. I go between slide cutting and my texturizing shears a lot. Like I said, I do a lot of like deep point cutting, which helps remove weight. I think those work best for me. I like to do little sections at a time and have my client feel it. How's that feeling? Does it feel lighter? Does it still feel really bulky to you? I'm a big visual cutter, so I like to see how it's laying. Like I can see when there's like a corner that maybe is making it look thick, or there's a part that just like isn't laying right because there might be too much like hair underneath. That's a big one. kind of, for a while, the undercut was really in when people had like really long, thick hair.
Mhm.
Not everybody wants that though. Especially with like those shorter haircuts. Sometimes I will cut like from under the occipital bone down. I will cut it a little bit shorter than the rest of the haircut, or maybe even put a little bit of like a graduation into it, because then it helps the rest of the hair like lay like more beveled, which is sometimes what people are looking for. And it helps take out all of that underneath weight without shaving the back of their head.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on that at all, Mel?
Um, I feel like it really like depends on like the person to kind of like what they want, because I feel like some people come in and like that's something that they're like set on, and then like some people kind of just like come in and like ask like for our professional opinion. So I think just kind of like determining like what would be good to kind of like remove like bulk or weight,
Sure.
I
Yeah.
guess, like for that person.
And that's the thing too, is like a lot of the times I don't necessarily like tell my clients all of these details I'm doing. It's like things I know to do from the consultation we had. So I
Yeah.
don't have to say like, hey, I'm going to go in and point cut all these, like they don't care. They don't know what that means. It's kind of just like knowing how to give them what they asked for. So then another way, so I do a lot of refining clearly on like thick haired guests. Again, being careful with the texturizing shears and with the razor, because it too much can make their ends look frizzy. It can create holes. It can create ledges. It can make sure that the hair is, it makes the hair almost look damaged. It can make the ends look too thin, which really the only way to fix those issues is to kind of cut shorter, which can, you know, make somebody very unhappy.
Yeah.
If they're trying to grow it out. On fine haired guests, really the only way I like refine the haircut is checking the base. And a lot of the times I only do the layers when the hair is dry. Sometimes when someone's hair is really fine, they might not even want layering because they feel like it takes away. That's when I would step in and give my opinion of maybe doing like a really long light layer. Might help give them some shape, but I always do it dry because again, I don't want to create a hole. I don't want to create any ledges. I want it to feel soft and I want it to feel wispy and something that they're going to like to give them shape. And then finally, when refining the haircut, I always do the face framing or the bangs, seeing, are they laying at the right spot? Do you want it closer to your eye? Does it feel really heavy? Do you wish there were more? Asking questions like that. Again, now we're seeing a lot of like those like Hollywood blowout layers and curtain bang. With those, even if the hair is fine, when it's dry, I always do again what I said with the base. I pick up the hair and I do like a couple long, deep point cuts, and then I comb it back, and it helps it fan out of their face so much nicer and helps them give that look, especially when their hair is heavy. But pretty much any hair kind of needs just a little bit of texturizing at the ends to make it style like all the pictures we see.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like too, like no, unless like you want like a blunt bob, like no one really wants like that fresh, like blunt like haircut look. So I think it is really important to go back and kind of like see how the hair is laying when it's dry, and then
Yeah,
go from there.
yeah, for sure. So then I always ask like, how's everything feeling? How does it look? And then that's when they might say, you know, I wish this was shorter, whatever. You can go through and, you know, refine what they like. One important thing I always do is I take a step back and I ask the client to run their hands through their hair. How does it feel? Are there any spots that might feel too bulky? Is there anything that feels too long still? Is whatever. Because sometimes they need to feel it to know what it is. So we do that. I always hand them a mirror and do like a full 360 in the chair so that they can see every angle of it, make sure it's all great. And then I carve out extra time at the end of all of my hair cutting services, especially when it is like a new transformational cut, to go over styling. I always end my haircuts with styling it as close to the reference photo as possible so that they get like the full effect of what they came in for. And I do save a little bit of time for educating them on how to style their hair like that, especially if it is a new cut, a new style, they've probably never tried it. I give them tips on how I would do it. I show them sometimes I'll give them the iron and like let them try one. However, we might need to do it. Giving them your little tips and tricks of how you curl hair, how you make your curls last, because people always want to try and recreate the style at home. And if you can help them recreate their style at home, they will think that their haircut is nicer and that you did, a better job than anybody else that they ever had, because now they're being able to recreate a look at home and look like that all the time. And they don't only like look nice on days that they come to the salon.
Yeah, I think too, like taking like extra like 5 or 10 minutes at like the end and kind of going over like what would be the best way for them to do it. I think that makes the client like really appreciate you and like actually like be excited, and then like, well, again, like what you said, like their haircut even more, because like they can style it like how it's styled at the salon. And I feel like a lot of people always say that like they like their hair when it's styled at the salon, but not at home because they can't recreate that.
Right. And then finally, when the haircut is wrapping up and we've gone over styling and they love it or whatever, we put in our finishing products. And then from there, I always like to talk about what's next. So like, if you're trying to keep up, if you're trying to keep up, this look, you should come back maybe in like 6 to 8 weeks, and we can clean it up a little bit here. Or if you're trying to let it grow, come in this amount of time. And then I always try to pre-book them, because especially with haircuts, people let it get away from them if it's not pre-booked. And then they kind of don't come back for a while until they are like, oh my God, my hair looks awful. I like to remind them of, events coming up like holidays or, whatever, so that they can kind of keep in mind things that they would know so that they can get in when they need to get in.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to pre-book haircuts.
Yeah. So is there any questions so far? Another thing we can touch on really quickly too, with haircuts, how they kind of go hand in hand with color. Sometimes, a client will come in for a haircut, and then while you're cutting, the subject of color comes up or whatever, they're thinking about doing this, keeping whatever color that they have in mind. So if they're going to do something like a balayage or something like that, or if they already have it, like keeping that in mind too when you go to cut, because you don't want to cut off all of their lighter ends. You don't want to like layer all of that away. So keeping that in mind and like expressing those things to them as well, because that's also something that like a client just doesn't think about.
Yeah.
Do you have any last things you want to add, Mel?
I think we covered everything pretty well.
Okay. Well, if there are no questions, then I think we're going to wrap up for today. If you do, later on come across a question or need us to kind of go over or clarify anything, feel free to post in band so we can get back to you and answer all the questions. This is recorded as always, so feel free to, go back, or if you missed it, we have it recorded for you. And if there's no other questions, then we will see everyone next week, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, bye.